the book of the elders. And it's a story about 3 men sitting on a bench, right? Sitting together. And a guy races past them, like full speed. And here's what's going on in each of their minds. The first says, oh, this man has just committed a crime, and he's racing off to get away from the police. The second thinks, oh, this man is running off to sin somewhere. Maybe he has a woman, he's married, and he's running off. And the third man, who has like the grace of God, says, this man is racing to do something good. He's racing to do the work of God, some good work, some holy work. God bless him. Look how fast he races to do that work. Now, you tell me, they saw all the same stimulus. They saw the same situation. And what was the difference? Why did they come up with 3 different conclusions? Why? Because in here, something was different for each of them. Some different disposition. Some different spirit. So I ask you now, what do you think? What do you think? You know, the elder Thaddeus from Serbia has a beautiful book called Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives. And it's absolutely true, because most of what we do, all of what we do is starting here in our minds. Where are our minds? Where are our thoughts? What are we thinking about no matter what's going on? What are we thinking about? And that, my friends, is the most gigantic arena in the universe. Because that's where we are all the time. We shouldn't stay there. I mean, obviously, the whole teaching of the mind descending into the heart. But before we get there, we have to think about what we do with these thoughts. Do you ever have what we call stray thoughts? Stray thoughts? They're not yours. They're not your thoughts. We think we control everything. That even people who are like so in control of everything, their thoughts are racing wildly like wild horses. All of us. The idea is to tame our thoughts, to collect our thoughts, to gather our thoughts when they are really ours. Because most of the time, they're not. They're like those, like St. Paisius says, they're like those planes going overhead. And unless you give them a place to land, unless you give them an airfield, they won't land. They're just thoughts that are coming willy-nilly from the enemy, for sure, from the world, from our imagination. Those are the 3 sources of most thoughts. And so most thoughts need to be dismissed. Most people, we dare say, don't dismiss most thoughts, right? Most temptations. Most people accept them as if they were their own thoughts. And, unfortunately, they speak on them. They act on them. They live some other kind of a life. Because these thoughts then become dominant. We become a slave to our thoughts. Have you heard of that expression? A slave to your thoughts. But they're not really your thoughts. So what do? How do we discern all that? The church has given us great gift, a lot of teaching on this topic. Because this topic is the crux of everything. Do you see someone doing something? It's because they've thought of it. Whether it's an evil thing or a good thing or neutral, it doesn't matter. They've thought about it. And they do that thing because it's their disposition. Can you change your disposition? Oh yes. Beginning with baptism. Beginning with, the holy mysteries. Little by little, those droplets of grace, if you want to call them, they have an effect on the disposition which has been dry before that, which has not paid attention to anything except my own thoughts, my own filter, my own way of thinking and doing things. That's got to be the right way. Why? Because I'm thinking it. Because it's what I see, it's what I hear. We trust this, we trust this, we even trust this when we speak. Don't trust any of it. Test all of it. So how do you test it? Oh, well, we have a lot of history. 2,000 years of history And also the Holy Scriptures, which kind of come out of that history. To test these things. Well, I read somewhere that if I have this thought, it could be this, or it could be this. But I'm confused. What if it's this? What if it's this? And then we ask. You have the humility to ask the question, to say, I'm having this thought, but is it this the meaning, or is this the meaning, or should I accept it, or should I reject it? But you know what? And upon that answer lies your salvation. So one answer after another after another. Notice we haven't talked about anything that we've done, behaviors, or conversations, or activity. It's because the womb of all of your life is right here in your thoughts. So, as a person goes down the road of the spiritual life, they take all of their thoughts and dip them deeply into the grace of God, trying them, burning some of them off, embracing some of them. Because if you become a saint, like these, if the saints, no, not if, they did do this, they completely brought forth their thoughts in their lives, in their behaviors. And that's how they became saintly. Saintly thoughts, by weeding out the other ones and by really focusing and enthroning the ones that are of God. The ones that are really me, authentically me. Not the ones where I put a mask on or worried about this problem or that problem, but instead, the real authentic person that God made me. The more I think about that and act upon it, live it, it overcomes like the trouble around us. Like, for instance, take these little ones, like as they grow, they're tempted. All of us have been there because we're living in this fallen place. We're tempted at some point maybe to do something we're not supposed to. And then, when we hear the word, did you do that? To say, no, I didn't do that. You see that? That is, and we have to teach the children, and we have to teach ourselves that the first impulse is either from the devil or from some experience. You've seen one of your buddies do that, and hey, look, you got away with it. And I mean, it's very interwoven, it's a big complex of things. And we jump on it and we say, no, I didn't do it. And for sure, I just watched you do it. And yet we go to that default position of deception and lying and falsehood. And that is a great gain for the enemy. When he sees us doing that, we have this, begins with our thoughts. Like, can you imagine? I would love, just for 2 seconds, like in the middle of a confession or something where there's some situation like Christ encountered today, to be able to say, no, you're thinking this, you're not thinking this. You're thinking this, you're not thinking this. You did do this. And then you eventually watch your 5-year-olds and see, it's so compelling. It's so invitational. It's so inspiring. Yes, I like it. And to have joy. This is the overcoming, you see, of these thoughts. And you see how difficult it is? Given no input, given no sort of instruction or counseling, we will go to that default position and defend ourselves and protect ourselves and hurt ourselves and turn our back on Christ. So that's why it's important to hear like this. You hear how Christ, in both Gospels, say, without a word being spoken, he says, why do you have evil in your heart? Why do these questions rise in your hearts? Nobody said a thing, but he knew it, just looking, gazing into their eyes. And I dare say the saints have the same, and they still do, have the same gift. The gift of being able to discern. And it's a sad thing, it's a sad realization when you're talking to a living saint and you're not exactly telling you the truth. And they're just looking at you. And it really, really concern yourself if they go like this. They do that little, And then it's this, I'm sorry, I lost my mind for a minute. It's an invitation. It's invitational to always tell the truth. and to not try to protect or hide or have a secret or have a black place or nothing like that. Because there is no secret place. What's being confessed like in little corners of the church these days in confession with sinful priests with you in the dark is being shouted out in heaven by the angels already. Everybody in the kingdom already knows. And they're rooting for us to get it all out. They're rooting for us to confess it and to finally say, no, I'm not going to take that thought or that thought. Those are lies. And I've lived by those lies for the longest time. And now I'm going to live by the truth, right? This is the story of all the saints, whether they were holy from infancy, as some were, or whether they were holy like only later in life, after they came to their senses, and stopped living according to the falsehood. Jesus knows everything. And he knows your thoughts, as illustrated in two Gospels. Why do evil things? Allow yourself to have Christ in front of you all the time, so that when you're thinking even something evil, something against someone, we could talk all day about like how even in our thoughts, we judge people all the time. Unless we have practiced this practice of not allowing those thoughts in. No. Not that one. I told you the story. The priest I was confessing to back in Pennsylvania years and years ago, he told me the story of a man who, when he had a thought, or when he had like gossip, when he heard gossip, or when like some gossip came into his head somehow, he started changing the topic. He changed the topic from whatever that was, that filthy thing, to death. His favorite topic was death. He said, he started talking to these people. They'd be talking about, hey, what about so-and-so? Hey, so-and-so, hey, you know, like all of that demonic pathway that goes to nowhere except perdition. He would say, I'm sorry, I haven't been paying attention. I've been thinking about my death and how glorious it's going to be. Like when they lay me out in the coffin, and they'll be praying for me, and I want so many prayers. Brothers will be praying for me. They thought he was crazy. They thought he had lost his mind. And you know what? So what? So what? That's a blessed foolishness, if you will. That was his particular cross, his particular ascesis. Like, you do your own thing. But he never said it. He never fell into that judgmentalism, or that like critical mind, or whatever like that. Now, it's not, on the one hand, Deacon Elijah just said to me when we were hearing the epistle about love and, you know, love those who persecute you and all those sweet. He said, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? I said, okay. But what makes it hard? What makes it hard is the things we put in the way of it. So someone asked me just yesterday, I'll close with this image. Just yesterday asked me about, look at the world, look at what we're doing to the world, how we kill it, look at the smoke, you know, a lot of it man-made. Look how we're killing each other. Look how we're just, the earth is becoming rotten. How we treat the earth, how we treat each other, how we treat God. You know, like, how do I live with this? Or maybe how do I deal with this? But basically, it's how do I live with this? When I have all this, it's like I come into the church in my heart, it gets protected again, it gets a balm, you know, a balm soothes it, etc. And then I go back, and it's like I'm living in two worlds. And so the only answer is the answer of today, today's feast day, the feast of the procession of the Holy Cross, right? Why do you think they carry the Holy Cross for days and weeks throughout the city of Constantinople and into the neighboring cities? And they carried it like in a parade. Think of the biggest parade you've ever seen, right? Like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, you know, that big one with all the big goofy-looking balloons and all that. Think of that size and bigger even of a crowd when the only feature was the precious and life-saving wood of the cross that was being carried through the streets in procession, and people would fall down on the ground and Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, they'd be singing beautiful hymns. This is the only thing, the only weapon, we call it, you heard it in the hymns, the only weapon which is worthy of Christ. It's called the weapon of peace. The cross is the weapon of peace. And by that cross, how much evil has been conquered throughout the history of the world. So, we have to think about why. Who went up on that cross? And why? He went up on that cross, and everything was against him. Come on. You're worried about the world? The world was completely against our Lord and God and Savior Jesus Christ. Completely. Like everybody turned on him. Even the apostles. They ran away. John didn't run away. The Myrrhbearers didn't run away. The Mother of God didn't run away. But his bosom companions, beginning with Peter, the number one, and James, and all the rest, they left him, Don't be surprised if that happens to you in your life. That this gets wrong, this family member abandons you, this one, God forbid it happens. But the only thing that's going to prevent that from happening is our willingness mutually to suffer. And it was Christ's willingness to go up on this cross. We don't just fall down before a tea that's made of wood or plastic or metal or something. That would be stupid. That would be paganism. Instead, we fall down before the voluntary suffering of the God-man who didn't have to do it, and He did it for you. He did it for us. He did it for you. And that makes sense of everything else. So when we can't make sense, and when we can't deal with the evil atrocities that are going on, just think of this story from, actually I'm really going to close with this story. It was from Father Tom Hopper. Father Thomas told a great story of when he was a young priest. God rest his soul. When he was a young priest, he went into the hospital, and there was a dying man in there, and he had been suffering a long time. He had been dying a long time. And he was like, his name was Steve Shushareva. I don't know how we remember that, but that's the story. He went in there to do his priestly thing, and he said, "Why do I have to suffer so long? I'm suffering for months and months with this cancer," whatever he had. And Father Tom, he was very young at the time, but he had just been out of seminary, so all the theological ideas were fresh in his mind. And he said, yes, but you are, this is a fancy, whenever you hear this, I want you to press the priest more and more. Say, no, not good enough. He said, you are co-suffering with Christ. You are sharing in His sufferings. You are you ever hear that? Yeah. Okay, that's a theological seminary answer. And the priest said, the sick guy, he said, yeah, but he literally only suffered a short time. Even 3 hours. And it was over. I'm suffering months and months and months, right? So Father Thomas then had to go somewhere where they never taught him in seminary. There's a million things that they don't teach you in seminary. But he went to the heart of the matter. He went to Christ. And he said, well, but it seems to me that if you put your suffering and all the suffering that's ever existed from the beginning of the world until the end of time, until Christ comes again, and you put all that big, massive lump of misery onto one side of the scale, and you take the one person suffering, even if you shorten it it was longer than 3 hours for sure. It was like his whole life. But if you take that suffering of Christ on that dusty afternoon in Jerusalem, 2,000 years ago, and you put it on this side of the scale, everything on the other side flies off. Because on that day, 2,000 years ago, in that miserable place, for the whole world to see as He was posted up in the sky, did not die or suffer or die just any man, just any human being going through some suffering of cancer or whatever misery we go through. Most of the time because of something we've caused, by the way. It's because that man was God. That was the God-man, Jesus Christ, who Himself took on your suffering, Steve Shushareva, in the bed right now, and all of your suffering, all of the collective suffering of this community, all the collective suffering of this world, even at present, all the suffering of the past, and that which is to come, which we don't even know how horrible that's going to be yet. He took it all on because he knew all of it. And you know what? He not just knew it here, right? He knows our thoughts. He knew it in experience. He knew it here. That's the gem of Christianity. Your Orthodox Christianity is a loving, tender embrace of Christ and the cross. The two can't be separated because he suffered unnecessarily for himself, but necessarily for us, who are miserable in our, we get like some small, you break a nail and you get a splinter or something, and you say, oh, the whole world is over, He suffered and died for that too, for you feeling sorry for yourself in small things. That's why. Or that's how. Only that suffering, death, leading to the resurrection and the ascension and the enthronement on the right hand of his Father, that's how any of our suffering makes sense. It's the only way. It's the only way. So when you're tempted by some suffering, maybe coming from another person or coming from a physical thing, or just look at the gospel and remember, and it's Christ talking to you directly. Why do questionings rise in your heart? Why are you troubled? Why are all these questionings arising? It is I, myself. See, I have never abandoned you. I've never left you. I've always been with you. Don't forget that. Don't look away from that. That's what gives meaning to your life. That is our life. Amen.